Welcome back to Apocalypse and Genesis. Imagine for a moment you are one of your ancestors. Before wokeism, atheism, deconstructionism, when the world was broadcast in black and white, when schools taught first principles instead of diversity, socialism, and how to play victim. The closest we ever came to the current social's confusion was a good day at the library in the philosophy section. Believe it or not, we had culture before anarchy until just recently. Back then, we might see a nation or government much like a human life. In our infancy, we imbibed family values like milk from the tit. In childhood, we absorbed attitudes about religion and community like vitamins in our breakfast cereal. In adulthood, we applied these beliefs the best we could and sought through our enterprise to encourage a world of peace and prosperity to pass along something of value to children and grandchildren. In the end, we would acquaint ourselves with mortality, waiting to see which bit of ourselves or the world at large would be next to fall into decay, obscurity, and death. When I was in grade school, we saw America as the logical offshoot and reincarnation of Athenian democracy and the Roman Republic. We had a Judeo-Christian ethic immortalizing 12 great commandments, and we had a legacy of 6,000 years of art and literature to sort through as our sum total of history. What kept all of it grounded for us was a bit of ritual and ceremony. Once a week we would dress up, bow our heads, listen, and rejoin the sacred time, where through the liturgical year and a series of national holidays, we relived our civilization's never-ending story of creation and eternal return. I don't know about you, but for me, the very best time of year was this one leading up to Christmas. It was the great celebration of love when families got together. We went out singing in the cold night air. Churches were filled to the brim, and shopping malls were a kaleidoscope of red satin, bright lights, and shiny bags of surprises, not to be glimpsed until the blessed day. As a little guy on Christmas Eve, I remember what seemed like the pastor's best sermon of the year, getting home tired, but firmly intent on staying up all night to hear the jingle of reindeer and see Santa Claus trading a tree full of presents for a couple of homemade chocolate chip cookies and a glass of milk. And there were hints of something greater being tossed about, stories of a great star to rise in the east, three wise men on a long journey, all history leading to a special place in Phoenicia called Bethlehem Ephrata, from whence would rise the world's next Moshiach, king and shepherd. We had just been initiated into the sacred time, the trek of Orion's belt around the zodiac. Talk of a great conjunction marking a return of the great star, announcing a new age to the world. It would be the return of an archangel, a nova in the heavens, the arrival of a cosmic being at whose feet we might lay our cares just before the great year blossomed again, like the tiny buds replacing leaves on the tree of life. It all is paradox when we speak of eternities in the world. For instance, how did the ancients know about a precession of more than 25,000 years? And yet they could only speak of the last quarter in which we find ourselves. They said the world had begun in light and fire around 4000 BC, and it made the beginning of the Bible and the Rig Veda. But Egyptians 2,000 years ago, according to Diodorus Siculus, reckoned time from the reign of Helios to Alexander the Great, which was a span of 23,000 years. The Hebrews spoke of a holy week of God's creation as taking 7,000 years. Hindus and Arabs, too, remembered something terrible happening to the creation at each quarter precession. They had different names for pole shift and reversal back then. They called it the trepidation of the equinoxes, the idea that for a time All the world might go upside down and time run backwards, or the sun might assume a new place in the sky. Much later, scientists would run experiments to see what happens when you tilt the world 45 degrees back to where magnetic north starts to line up with geographic north, and suddenly it would veer off in the direction of the equator to once again resume its journey. The last time the sky supposedly fell was at the end of the Pleistocene, half a precession ago, and that great death had also happened when the Egyptians said time began at the precession around 23,000 BC. In the world you and I have known, we could watch the planets lined up here as we will see them next April at the boat of the sun or riding the great wheel of the sky on a long march right to left, slowly following the sun around the four seasons. And yet we know that one day the ecliptic will flip directions as surely as if we flew from New York City to Melbourne, Australia. I don't know if you've been here before, but I happen to think you and I live in the sacred time where Apocalypse meets Genesis, where the myths are playing out every night under the stars, and all we need to comprehend the eternal return is to pay attention before God next claps his hands together. Fortunately for us, he doesn't do it very often. We catch glimpses of it in Psalms 46 and 104, even if we haven't the time to search out the prophecies. We will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains slip into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains quake at its swelling pride. Or, let the Lord be glad in his works. He looks at the earth and it trembles. He touches the mountains and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have my being. I believe we are about to reach the year Apocalypse meets Genesis and begins fittingly with a view to love and struggle, twin themes of life this side of the veil. Babylon, China, Mexico, I could show you the stones. New Apocalypse would lead to Genesis over the course of 14 years. That would begin with a phoenix, the Word of God, a Jupiter-Saturn at the heart of Aquarius. I remember the day like it was yesterday, driving through the foothills of Virginia with my late wife, chasing the sunset that would begin Baruch's prophesied 2 weeks of years. Note the gesture of the two priest kings at the tree of life beneath the god of sky. They're signaling a pole shift near the vernal equinox and an eclipse between a Saturn sun near Capricorn and a Jupiter moon in Aries. Now that may not be the unpredictable day nor the hour of Matthew 25:13, but it's certainly a season to have your ducks in a line and your pantry filled. The ancients told us to beware the Ides of March. Here you can see the menorah lit up in the sky. It was Egypt's ladder of Seth, or the boat of the sun, or Jacob's ladder, or the son of Jonas that Jesus talked about. The day of the moon below Cassiopeia is also when Caesar was murdered as an aspiring god in the cult of the Sol Invictus. 5 days later for us will be the vernal equinox between Jupiter and Saturn, the one for which we've been waiting. This looks incredibly like the day someone canceled Atlantis. The Mayans, Egyptians, Ammonites, and others expected the big day to arrive with an eclipse or two. And look at that. You have the entire Ennead cruising over the dragon Cetus. As I get older, it becomes obvious to that one of our basic problems is our disparate understandings of first principles. How I go through life is in no small way determined by how I view God and how I am to behave in accord with that vision. growing up listening to rabbis, priests, or imams, we reach very different concepts of God, just as you might expect. Ask one of my siblings, children, or grandkids what they make of me, an old guy who collects rocks and speaks of end times. And one might remember the family patriarch, or one who taught them about life, someone who wore a blue uniform for 3 decades, or a grandpa who runs us to the store for ice cream, books, and video games. The rabbis have a favorite prayer in number 6 that gets to the issue. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. The issue here revolves around the word face, because it can be seen as pana or panim, face or faces. So God is like Saturn, an old patriarch to the chosen people. God is like Jupiter, the sun slain. God is like Mars, an angry one demanding we become warriors on his behalf. The idea is in 2 Gnostic texts called the Enthronement of Sabaoth. One also sees the face of God in the wisdom of Mercury, the beauty of Venus, the brightness of the sun, and the shadows of the moon. Some saw the 7 sages as stars of the Big Dipper, but I see them as the planets. May his faces shine upon you and give you understanding. The day after 2024's Day of Mars crossing the vernal equinox is Beltane, a day revered by the Celts with bonfires, set up to remember a day of destruction and creation long ago when Sirius or Betelgeuse set off a nova for nearly a year. I remember when I was little, my grandfather would have gathered all the year's trimmings from the trees and grass to a level spot at the bottom of the hill between the barbed wire fence, a creek lined with blackberry vines, and a garage at the end of the driveway. And then one evening, all the little ones would gather, family and neighbor kids, and he'd arm us with pointy sticks and a great bowl of marshmallows, and off we'd go for a night of laughing, screaming, and jumping over or stomping little flames at the edge of a 70-foot fire. Back in those days, having a barbecue or bonfire didn't require a permit or a visit from the fire chief. It was just a great day in the countryside. Here you can see in Apuleius, possibly why St. Paul's sermon to the unknown God took place on the Areopagos, the Mars Hill, just a walk down from Athens' Parthenon, or a stroll up from the Agora. At the end of time, which we saw as our proximate end to the procession, Sumer and Assyria told us to watch for the rise of a red star in the south. They called it the Star of Marduk, which, as you probably know, was considered the son of God, the son of Ea or Enki, the Enlil or king of the gods for his time, a position the high god gave up and in some mythologies in deference to his son. In others, he remained Yahweh number 1, the God of spirit, and the Son became Yahweh number 2, or Adonai, the angel of the Lord. So when Jesus tells us he was tempted by a judge and offered King of the world, when he said he was one with the Father and that he expected us to see the Queen of the South rising up in judgment at the end of the age, he was telling us something about what we are about to face, which I think spells a reversal. There are many names for God and his enemies in the Bible, so I'm not sure what they considered the name of blasphemy in the code. I suspect any and all of them will do. Some Christians believe the Antichrist will be the leader wounded in the end game, as in Zechariah 11, where it says, "Woe to the idle shepherd that leaveth the flock. The sword shall be upon his arm and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened." On the other hand, one might view it as a prophecy of the 7 churches, none of which would fare very well in this day and age, since all of them were in Turkey, who now supports Hamas and the rest of the anti-Western jihadi madness. Most specifically, I would worry about Rome. There is a hadith in which Muhammad clearly foresees a time in which to put the Vatican out of its misery, and this would be centuries after his militants had captured Istanbul. The Celts tried to warn us of a day in which the arc of the sun between horizons would harbor all of the planets, and we are just about there. I believe the fall of Lucifer and this rise of Marduk are virtually the same event, because the two are members of the same solar system passing through ours. The dragon of Revelation 12 must drag a third of the stars to the ground, while the beast draws new ones into view. And that's the sign of a sudden pole shift, and might also signify an apparent changing of the guard in the heavens. Like which visitor gets to be our next North Star replacing Saturn? And does the Heb-Sed mean Jupiter and Saturn are switching places? Such a reversal took place 13,000 years ago, and now it's due to happen again. I imagine it takes place in the time required for the visitor stars to race past the sun, which according to legend might require 3.5 years. Regarding the Savior watching the proceedings, is he holding the book of names, or is that a sickle for the harvest? This stone was obviously carved with a look to the Bête de la Mer tapestry in Angers, France. As you can see from the old illustration of the said ceremony in Egypt, the proceedings involving the pharaoh simulating Jupiter and Orion trading sides during his run, we wouldn't expect that to happen normally until the summer of 2025. But this day of the bullfight shows up in the Epic of Gilgamesh, kicking off 7 years of famine. It was the day Mithras slayed a white bull in Roman Britain. Others have described it as the day of the Baptist. So I, for one, expect something big that day, even if it's only to be immensely relieved. You would think if Planet X were locked gravitationally with Venus and Nibiru was locked with Jupiter, then the day those two finally got together might spell that special gravito-electromagnetic day people have been praying for. You know, the one where the good children get to fly away. The old signs I have found seem to favor something happening involving vernal equinox and Orion. But as you know, those can be dates 3 months apart, vernal equinox to summer solstice, or they can be 90 degrees apart, 0 to 6 hours right ascension. So once we get past the summer solstice, I don't know what I'll do with myself. Maybe get drunk, or go on a trip, or write a book, or move back to Spain. Honestly, I have no idea. I would very much like to think it won't be to obsess for another 14 years. But the truth is, the big day takes longer now than it used to. The Taino moon god shows the number 14. Ohuelan spaceship carvings show 14 steps. The Babylonian tablet showed 14 years. I have a Hongshan dragonstone with 14 curls to the tail. But if you look around, there is an altar stone in Malta that shows only 11 years passed before the big day of the owl when she was in the south. So realistically, we might have to wait and see how the elections turn out, or when the Chinese might choose to launch their offensive against Taiwan. I'd say they have about 10 months if they want to hand us a fait accompli. Perhaps Israel gets mad at Iran and the whole Middle East goes up in smoke. Something's going to hand us a raw deal because it's time to suffer here in the valley of death. From my vantage point, I one day expect to see the ecliptic headed the other way, and yet I can't tell you how that process might work. Eventually, they threw out the medieval concept of the trepidation of the equinoxes because they couldn't observe it in real time. It was just a legend from thousands of years back, and since we didn't reinvent science until 500 years ago, well, legends just don't count. According to the Bundahishn, the last pole shift swung us to the right, and the next one will toss us to the left. Just remember, whatever you see Orion and Sirius doing in the way of a fall to the left means the Bay of Bombay or some other place near the equator just shot north to the pole. And somewhere I heard a rumor that Russia was willing to take people from India when the time comes, which is interesting. If you look in the Vendidad, you find that the folks who took over India and Iran had come from a place up in the Arctic Circle. Here are some representations of the Leo event at the half precession. The one in the center is from Israel, the one on the left is Elamite, and I think the one on the right might be Sasanian. But there are similar pieces around the world. Even if an event doesn't make your history books, your ancestors knew and tried to warn you. Depending on the orientation of Typhon or Seth, the destroyer or heron or green dragon, whatever you call the dark one, I think that object is what will determine if we go through a slight pole shift, trepidation of the equinoxes, or a full reversal. And Manetho, the Egyptian historian, alludes to it in his sacred book. They call the lodestone the bone of Horus, just as iron is often like to be attracted and led after the stone, but it often again turns away and is repelled in the opposite direction. So the salutary, good, and rational movement of the world at one time attracts, conciliates, and by persuasion mollifies that harsh Typhonian power. And then again, when the latter has recovered itself, it overthrows the other and reduces it to helplessness. 6.5 millennia before the last reversal, the vernal equinox stood where today we find the winter solstice, and very close to the galactic center between Scorpio's tail and the arrow of Sagittarius. And again, this was the time of a great light exploding across the heavens. And here are a few reasons I think it might be coming to our time. I believe that Cycladic goddess to the right tells the tale. She sports the special great conjunction in Capricorn that precedes the staff god events of Aquarius. What is called the Word of God in the Bible was a Jupiter sun at the heart of Aquarius, something called the Phoenix in other cultures. But as you can see on the statue, the great conjunction of Capricorn preceded the Taurus event and the Virgo event, and it is expected to precede our next event leading up to Aquarius, even if we suffer a brief rollover along the way. All the talk in recent days of World War III reminded me of something Ronald Reagan once said to Mr. Gorbachev and the United Nations. Cannot swords be turned to plowshares? Can we and all nations not live in peace? In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize our common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war? I'm not sure what he meant about the alien force among us. You might enjoy the Thiuba prophecy of Michel de Marquet, but you should know Homo sapiens sapiens was not the first successful humanoid on this planet, and we may not be the only ones here for that matter. In this time of the fourth ram, we go back um, to the mosaic floor of Beth Alpha Synagogue with Elios in his quadriga. The 4 times in our zodiacal procession that something happens on the Great Cross, where Pisces Aquarius meets Virgo Leo, and that tree of life crosses something traveling the Milky Way between Taurus and Sagittarius. In Revelation 13, we said people would give a holy name to the beast, and God would not be pleased. So here are a few ideas. The red star and the green dragon might show up in different places this time. My suspicion is that the one who really got around the zodiac is the old Ugaritic son of El, an infamous enemy of Yahweh called Baal. Back on the first slide, we saw that the Mayans expected an event between Jupiter and Saturn lined up with the first of Aries, involving an eclipse. And knowing the Maya ended their fifth Ahau of 5,125 years in 2020, this is the nearest event, meeting all the criteria. On the larger stone in the middle, you can see the destroyer hanging out in an event involving the first of Aries in the constellation Orion and the arrival of one called the Bull of Heaven, which I believe to be Jupiter, though some apparently called him a serpent named Zeus Python. In any case, that is Chuck Moll sitting there ready for a pole shift, and into his belly the Mesoamericans tossed blood and hearts as a sacrifice. Phoenicia carried the custom to old Europe and Africa, and it wasn't reformed until Akhmos and Abraham. The stone at the bottom right suggests a huge solar flare will launch this way, right around the time the red star pops up over the horizon. I suspect that could flip the electric switch for polarizing our magnetic pole and initiating the pole shift. I suspect the crossed arms of Pharaoh, the phoenix at Sol's changing analemma, and the arrival of the new sun are related events sometime next summer. I don't profess to know the connection between vernal equinoxes and the solstice event, but my suspicion is that one will become the other, a quick turn of the planet, and we will have lost a season. But again, that remains to be seen. There is a book on the fate of empires by Arthur John Hubbard, if you wish to study what might make the civilization last beyond our current difficulties in Ukraine, the Middle East, and the South China Sea. Where I spoke of family values and religion being at the core of society, Hubbard finds religion alone the long pole in the tent. He says, and please allow me to summarize, religion makes our personal conduct essential to the cosmos, the one thing indispensable. So it is to divinity that we must look for the key. Our reason overcome by obedience. In a life of self-sacrifice, our personal and group interests become transmuted into duty. Religious motive becomes the means of expressing how our lives fit into the universe. So a true and stable civilization is a byproduct of religion. Empire is only attained by believers, not self-interested imperialists. This world ultimately belongs to the unworldly. As we go into the season of peace, love, and goodwill toward men, remember with a sense of awe the most astonishing of Christ's beatitudes. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Teach your children to treat others like family, and eventually our current madness must sort itself out. Shem will bless you and keep you now and forever. Take care.